we wanted to understand the pricing of gas a little bit better here. So for more on why that is and what can be done, I'm joined now by Daniel Yergin. He's vice chair of the S&P Global. He's also author of The New Map, Energy, Climate, and the Clash of Nations, now out in a newly released and updated paperback edition. Bottom line is, if you want to understand these oil markets, there's only one guy to talk to, and it's Daniel Yergin. Mr. Yergin, I want to start with what may seem like a simple question with a very complicated answer. But I'm going to channel a friend of mine who said, this is not the first time the price of oil, a barrel of oil, has been more than $100 over the last 15 years. In fact, it's happened multiple times. But it is the first time that the price of gas has gone over $5. Explain that disconnect to the average viewer here.
What's happening, Chuck, is a global dislocation in the oil market that actually began before the Ukraine war, but has been made much worse by the Ukraine war. So in so many different parts of the world, the whole system, and it's a global system. I mean, the northeast of the United States is supplied with gasoline from Europe. Europe's supplied with diesel from Russia. That whole system's broken down. So it's all of these things have come together, and refiners have been pushed to produce biofuels. Now they're said produce more gasoline. So we're in a tight spot.
The other issue appears to be during the pandemic, when there was a glut, nobody was driving, refineries basically stopped refining, right? They had such a large inventory. Is there a lesson to be learned going forward that could prevent this kind of price whiplash that we've faced over the last 6 weeks?
I think you're right. You're absolutely right to focus in on the pandemic because demand collapsed. These companies lost an enormous amount of money and certainly shut down marginal refineries for that. I think the lesson here is keeping your eye on resilience and not forgetting about energy security. And we forgot about energy security because we went from importing 60% of our oil to being energy independent and just assumed everything would take care of itself. But if you suddenly say we're not going to import 800,000 barrels a day of Russian oil, which we did a couple months ago when the war started, that's going to impact the whole system. So I think in all these previous crises, there's been a dialogue between government and industry. It isn't happening this time, and you need it because you need to be talking to the people who daily have to manage this logistical system and move these supplies around the world and around the country.
All right, we know politics is getting in the way. We know the Democrats are looking for a boogeyman here in the oil companies. Are these hits on the oil companies fair? How about this? What's fair of these hits?
Well, let me say, I think what's fair is to say we're in the political panic season right now, and therefore you get these sound bites which actually solve nothing. But let me just give you one example. And to borrow a word that you used in the last segment, Chuck, you used the word weird. What's really weird is to say the oil industry, the domestic oil industry, isn't producing. Yet, according to the U.S. government itself, U.S. oil production is going to go up almost 1 million barrels a day this year, which is more than the new production in all the rest of the world. So what do you mean they're not producing? Another weird thing is talking to all these other countries like Venezuela, but maybe talk to the domestic industry and collectively try and solve the problems and try, by the way, to solve the supply chain problems that are affecting the operations of the industry just as they are the rest of the economy.
Give me an example here. Look, in the president's letter, it was interesting to me. Some people say the rhetoric was hot. I actually thought it was pretty mild, and they're not ready with sticks yet. It does seem as if they're trying, what can the government do to help incentivize expanding the capacity at refineries?
Well, I mean, obviously, a lot of it would be regulations to make it more feasible. A lot of refineries have shut down because the regulatory costs have gone up. I think that the letter, I mean, if there was Chuck Todd refinery, you'd be producing every barrel of gasoline you could right now.
Right.
So the notion that they'd be holding back just doesn't make economic sense at all. I think this adversary nature is not helping solving the problem that Americans are feeling at the pump. And, it goes back to we're in a political season where it's easier to have sound bites than to actually have sound policy.
In our strategic oil reserve, should we have a strategic, essentially post-refined oil reserve? Do we need to keep more of this? Is a way we could have kept, prices from totally getting out of hand here?
Yeah, I think that is a very reasonable question. And we do have one, I believe, in the Northeast, refined products, but it's not very big. I think it's harder to store refined products for a long time. Yeah, I think you need to build resilience. That's an example of resilience in the system, rather than, kind of playing catch up, what we're trying to do right now. It's tough because, the president, as you said, is going to go to Saudi Arabia. It's very hard to believe that the subject of oil will not come up directly or indirectly, and we'll probably get some kind of positive signal coming out of that, which may be good for the market. Of course, the oil market's also responding to like what the Fed is doing and so forth. But the thing is, Chuck, it's really tight right now. Iran's not coming back in the market because there's not going to be a nuclear deal. There's not vast amounts of oil waiting to be produced in Saudi Arabia. There's some, and of course the ban on Russian production is happening. So it is really a very difficult problem, and this is an emergency and it has to be managed as an emergency. I don't see how using the Defense Production Act, the government's not going to build a refinery, and by the way, it'll take 5 years to get it permitted. So you have to deal with what you have now.
What's real? When should we expect the price of gas to drop below $4 again?
Well, I think if you can just tell me when the Fed's impact will have on the economy, because I think that the biggest impact will be coming from a slower economy, which will then affect gasoline demand.
Yeah.
But, the wild card here is still what's happening with Russia and Ukraine and how that's dislocating the whole market. But even before we went into this crisis, it was a difficult situation. And by the way, I hate to raise another issue. If China finally comes out of COVID and its demand goes up, that's going to add to the pressure. So it's a tough time, and we're not that far from an election, but it'd still be better to, try and get beyond sound bites.
Yeah, and as Stephanie and I were just talking, there's no sign that people are going to stop spending money this summer. Demand is still up to travel, and it sounds like we may be dealing with these high gas prices at least through the summer. Daniel Yergin, as I said at the start, I can't think of anybody better or smarter to talk about this with, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.